In 20 minutes, we're barely going to scratch the surface. So I'm going to provide you with enough information to totally confuse you, and then you'll have to work it out at home later. So we're barely, even in an hour with the three of us together, we're still barely going to scratch the surface. So what I'm hoping to do is to do a bit of an introduction. I'm going to endeavour to explain the UK BIM Level 2 standard. I'm going to leave you with some resources which mostly are free that you can look up on the web or download or get hold of, and some final thoughts. So I've broadened out the context of what David Philp would have done, because I can't do what David does, but you'll have to put up with me instead. So in terms of an introduction, this is me. I'm an architect. I've been in the industry about 30 years or so. I'm a design manager and an architect. I do a lot of work with the CIB. I'm chair of the BIM Regional Hub in the South East and vice chair of BIM for SME, which is the specialist BIM 4 group for SMEs. So a bit more about that later. So let's just set the context of where we are. Do you remember those that are old enough? Remember 8-track cassettes? Yeah, okay. Betamax, VHS, that old argument. Who had a Commodore 64 or a Sega Saturn? Yeah, okay. And who had the ZX Spectrum when it first came out and did a little bit of computing? Yeah, okay, yeah. And then it started to develop, didn't it? So we had the Scion handheld. Anybody had one of those? Yeah, okay. I had a guy I worked with in an architect's practice who he had his entire life on that thing. You know, it was quite amazing. It was quite a clunky little box thing, wasn't it? And then I remember when the first facsimile machine came out, and we looked at this thing and wondered what the hell it was. And then remember the first mobile phones? They were bricks. We had one in the office, and it literally was a brick, and you carry a handset around with it, and so on. So you can see what's going on here. It's how technology has evolved. If you're a baby boomer like me, born sort of mid-50s, early 60s, then all this has happened in your lifetime. You know, and if we move forward and roll it forward a bit, then the iPhone 6 came out yesterday. The first iPhone only came out in 2007, but that as a piece of technology transformed all these phones and things that we carry around. And if you think about the iPhone itself, I've got a 64 gig iPhone 5. The Apollo 11 command module literally had something like 10 megabytes of memory, if that. Now I think it was kilobytes actually, but the command module, was nothing compared to the computing power that we carry around in our pockets now. And then you can roll this forward again now to thinking about big data and all those EPOS transactions and all the other stuff that's going on, and the technology that people use in their dark rooms to process all that stuff. Really heavy duty computing power, and bearing in mind that computing power is doubling every 18 months and the cost is halving at the same time. So there's all sorts of things going on here. So what am I really saying? I'm saying this. This phone is outside a hotel in Dublin where I stayed at the CETA conference in November. It's a payphone, and I imagine it was only installed a few years ago. But at the time, you can imagine it had been made by somebody, designed by somebody. It was state of the art. It'd be brand spanking new. And look at it now, it's just totally obsolete. It's totally obsolete because of the things we carry around in our pockets, the way technology is changing. And the way that digital technology is transforming all of our lives, then companies become obsolete, careers become obsolete, roles become obsolete. All this stuff is changing around it. It's literally the foundations and the tectonic plates on which we're walking day by day are now shifting on a grand scale, and it's not even really started yet. Because we see the impact of technology on all of our lives in all sorts of ways. On the previous slide, We had Facebook, founded 2004. If Facebook was a country, it's getting on for the second largest in the world. It's got something like 1.2 billion members. And that's in less than 10 years. You know, our lives revolve around these smartphones and all this connected technology. And if ever you lose your internet connection at home, or you lose your phone or you break it, you'll know what I mean, because you just feel lost now, don't you? Because there's nothing to keep tapping at to see what the hell's going on. So, in a broader context, the point I'm saying here is there are internal drivers in the construction industry and the manufacturing industry to change this new technology. But I would suggest to you, and this is just my view, it's not anybody else's, I'm just saying, I think the external drivers on the industry are far more potent, because all of our lives are going digital, and manufacturing and construction and design have got to go with the flow, because it all joins up, as we'll see a bit later, if I get time to get around to it. Anyway, okay, so there we go. So, you know, we're seeing a truly Darwinian evolutionary step change in the whole industry. You know, as we move from analog to digital and the impact it has. And just like evolution, some organisations will blossom and flourish and grow and develop. Other organisations, because they just can't make the change, they reach their evolutionary cul-de-sac and they'll go out of business. HMV, Blockbuster, Kodak, you know, when you look at how digital technology has transformed other industries, then we see the same sorts of things happen. And it's exactly the same in construction now. It will happen. It will happen. This is now inevitable. And we have to go with it and start to take this stuff on board, or we're going to be left behind. So, just talking about some basic principles of BIM to start off with. Wherever we sit in this process, we'll be familiar with it. So somebody creates a brief, a client wants something, whether it's a building or a product or whatever. Somebody does some design work, it's tendered or procured somehow, it's made or constructed, and then it's operated. It's installed and operated in the building, or you know, the building is run for itself. So wherever we are tonight, or whoever we all fit in this sort of cycle somewhere. It's very simplified, I know, but you know, this is the basic. An idea becomes reality, and there is a process to generate that. And then you can start a feedback loop around the FM cycle or the operational cycle to go back to reinventing it and changing it and updating it and all the rest. But basically, the I in BIM is information. And basically, irrespective of what method we're using to transfer this stuff, it's just information going around this cycle. And that might be digital information. It might be on the back of an envelope. It doesn't really matter. We're transferring information around this cycle. But in terms of BIM, we've got information and data going around the asset life cycle. And we plug into that, whatever our role is and whatever point in the cycle we're at. So, an Autodesk little graphic here. All hail Autodesk. So we have the life cycle here, we have the different stages, and you can imagine the different information that is produced at each stage and handed on to the next person in line. And one of the key things here is about the waste that's produced. And if you've seen that cartoon where the information is chucked over the wall between stages and the other guys try to catch it and they lose some of it and then they redo some of it, we have tremendous waste in the design and construction process and the manufacturing process. And what BIM can help us to do is to actually reduce that waste or even eliminate it. It's a very lean type of thinking if you're into that sort of philosophy. And there's the other thing to think about here, very briefly, is you can still, if you Google this on the internet, it's Be Valuable. It's a publication produced by Constructing Excellence several years ago now, but it's still really up to date, written by a guy called Richard Saxon, who you may or may not have heard of, but it doesn't matter. And he posited this idea of looking at the relative cost between brief and design, construction, procurement, and operation. And basically, you might argue about what these figures are, but the fact of the matter is, to actually operate and maintain something, whether it's a piece of kit, a chiller plant, or whatever, or a building, the fact of the matter is, the cost of doing that over its lifetime, which could be 100 years even, is far greater than the cost of designing and constructing it. So if we can create value in this phase, we can come up with some big numbers. If we can make savings there through some clever decisions over here, we can generate some big savings for ourselves, for our clients, for the people we work with. BIM can help us do that through optioneering, better design, better transfer of information, all sorts of things. And also feedback loops built in, so real-time feedback of the operational life cycle that can be assessed against the design criteria, and you can fine-tune systems and do all sorts of clever things. And these are just some of the clever things that you can do in a BIM environment. I'm not going to go through them all, but we'll probably mostly be familiar with the fancy CGIs and the animations and all that sort of stuff. But you can do all sorts of things, and I think the action at the moment is in these areas. I mean, we're seeing a lot more about 3D printing now, and automated construction, and compliance and validation. So your design can be run through, if you like, a BIM washing machine. It can be checked against a set of rules, and it can get a tick in the box, or it can say, actually, no, it fails here, here, here. You know, you can do simulations, you can do fire simulations, wind tunnel simulations, all sorts of things. But the idea is, I think before too long, we'll have industrial-sized 3D printers bashing out buildings, components. They're sending one up to the International Space Station to make spare parts. The US Navy has trialled it on warships to create spare parts while the ships are at sea. There's all sorts of applications. You'll see it used in bioengineering, hospitals, all sorts of stuff going on. You know, eventually, just like we've all got a PC at home or we carry one around, we'll all have a 3D printer. And you won't go to the shops, you'll just print stuff. So, UK BIM Level 2. You may or may not have seen this diagram, but this is by Mark Bew and Mervyn Richards, who are a couple of key people in the UK BIM task group. So this just basically charts the different levels of BIM and what you do. Now the key one that we're thinking about tonight is level 2. Now just for a moment, let's forget the technology and think about what happens in a design process. So I'm not so familiar with the manufacturing side, so I'm going to speak from a construction perspective, but you'll get the drift. You have different designers responsible in different disciplines, so you might have an architect, a structural engineer, a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, a production engineer, and a manufacturing engineer, and whatever else you guys do. But each of those guys will produce their own information, which I imagine somebody coordinates and integrates to bring it together into a coordinated and integrated design that can then be manufactured and produced. So we're all working in our separate disciplines and bringing stuff together. So the stuff we bring together and fit together is a composite. It's a federation of all those individual models. And really, that's what BIM Level 2 is, because in BIM Level 2, although we're using digital technology, people are still working in their individual disciplines, and we bring that stuff together in a collaboration platform. Autodesk have a product called Navisworks. I think BIM 360 does something similar, where we bring all the different discipline models together, and we can simulate them together, we can do clash detection, we can do other clever stuff, as we had on the other slide. So this environment is often called, it's called a common data environment, as it's defined by BS 1192 2007. It's also known as a composite environment or a federated environment, because The integrated design is a federation of all these individual disciplines. So in terms of process, in a way, it's no different to what we do now. It's just we're doing it all digitally, and we can do some really clever things with all the stuff we produce. But we can also share files. We can have libraries of objects that we draw upon to build into our models. We can share data. We can have benchmarking data in libraries, whether it's cost data, lead-in data, performance data, carbon data, energy data, whatever you want. And the list will just continue to grow. So that's the sort of information we have at level 2. A lot of people will talk about level 3, and they'll say, oh yeah, we're doing level 3 BIM already. And that is total BS. Because basically the protocols for level 3 BIM have only just been started to be worked on by the UK BIM task group, and they won't be released for about 18 months. The level 2 documentation is barely complete yet, as we'll see on the next slide, I think. So level 3 is really a bridge too far at the moment. We can have a discussion about that later if you wish. But level 2 is really what we need to be concerned about, because that's the target for 2016 in terms of public procurement. So these are the key level 2 documents. They're all available on the BIM Task Group website, or most of them are anyway, or the CIC website. So you've got 1192 Part 2, which is the capital delivery process, 1192 Part 3. You'll be getting the slides anyway, so you don't need to worry about writing it all down. 1192 Part 3 is about operational delivery. 1192 Part 4 is about COBE UK, which is the exchange protocol. It's basically a spreadsheet, but it's a really big one at different stages. The BIM protocol is actually an addendum contract that can be used as a BIM add-on for most standard forms of contract that we have in the industry at the moment. And then government soft landings is an extension of, if you've come across it, BISRIA soft landings, which is about the handover, commissioning and facilities management process of an asset. And it explains how you do that. And actually the use of GSL on projects is mandatory, on public sector projects, is mandatory from 2016, as well as the level 2 requirement. And people don't really talk about that much. There are two things hanging out. One is the classification system, which up until now was going to be Uniclass 2, but it's probably going to be something else. And also further work on the digital plan of work, which is, if you're familiar with the RBA stages, it's sort of like that, but only it's changed, and it's based around the CIC scope of services. And there's a competition with the TSB that is funding development work for that at the moment, and that won't be issuing the finished articles in terms of digital tools until probably, it's going to be early next year sometime, I would guess. This is a diagram from 1192 Part 2, which simply shows the life cycle. It shows the stages of development of the BIM model. It shows the different kind of data that we have, the 3D geometry, non-graphical data, and any other documentation we've got. And I've got to admit, if you haven't seen this diagram before, I imagine your mind is boggling. So what you need to do, as soon as you can get your hands on 1192 Part 2, get yourself a bottle of wine and sit down with this diagram and the book for an evening and try and make sense of it. Because actually it's all there in terms of the stages, the data drops, the decision points, the life cycle, and how it all works. This diagram has got everything on it. And that it does explain it all, but we haven't really got time to do it in detail now. And again, these are the level 2 process and deliverables. So you've got a common data environment, you've got your non-graphical data coming out in a COBE spreadsheet, which can be downloaded or output at different stages. We'll still have drawings of some kind, because I think people will still want to use drawings for some time. You'll have some sort of commercial setup, and you'll have your 3D geometry. And you'll be using a plan of work which has these different stages, and this shows how a model develops in detail and maturity and data richness through the development process. And again, if you look at the the digital plan of work as it is, that's on the BIM Task Group website, you can begin to get a feel of how this is developing. I won't dwell on that. If you're just starting out on BIM, then basically something that might help you is this diagram, because this helps you put together your own strategy and make an assessment of your own position. It breaks down activities across the industry and the stages, and helps you work out where you are, what training you need to do, what software you need to get, what activities you need to do, and all those sorts of things. And if you're a manufacturer or an engineer, you're in here somewhere, and if you work through this process, again, this is another bottle of wine and an evening where you sit down with an envelope and a thick pencil and just scribble this all out. And by the time you finish this process, you'll end up with an individualised little chart which will tell you what you need to do, what sort of software tools you might need, what training you might need, and what benefits you can get out of using this sort of technology. It's a very useful piece of work, and it's not really publicised very much, but I really suggest you get your hands on it. It's a really good piece of work. And then basically once you've got that, you need to start thinking about people, process and technology. So the technology is the small bit. You know, BIM isn't just about uploading a piece of software. It's about how your work processes work within your own organisation, your own role, but also how you fit in with everybody else, and how you communicate that, what training you need, what software providers do you need to talk to, and all that sort of stuff. Quickly whiz through this because I know I'm up against it. So if you haven't joined your local BIM hub, you can find the details on the regional champions here at this link. There are active BIM hubs in the Midlands, I know for a fact, so you can find out who to contact there. BIM for SME, again, if you're in an SME, get in touch with us, contact us through the website, details there. That's the government BIM website. You'll find tons of stuff to download there, including all the standards I've talked about, and lots of other stuff like case studies, best practice, all sorts of things going on. And a few other things I've thrown in there. One thing I'll point out is the B1M. If you use YouTube, this is like YouTube for BIM. So there's lots of videos on there explaining all sorts of stuff. And in fact, Fred has just put up there a 5-minute video where somebody explains BS 1192, PAS 1192 Part 2 in 5 minutes. Great, free, you know. So sign up for that. A few books there. If you want to buy the stuff, you can download for free here, which is in red. But if you want to buy a book, buy this one. It's about 100 pages. It's an easy read. It's by a guy called Steve Race, who's an international expert on BIM, but he covers the UK perspective, the UK standards. Plain language, simple language. It's a really good introduction, and you get it for about 15 quid on Amazon. A few other things you can download here, which I won't go through, come out recently. You can talk to these guys. They've done some case studies, which are available on the web. And the same with Mark Wright. He's a little architect. Well, he's not an architect, actually. He's a surveyor in Oxford. Works on house extensions and all sorts of stuff using BIM. So it's worth looking at his stuff. So, you know, BIM isn't just for big organisations. It's for small organisations too, and for small projects. And finally, never lose sight of this. It's all about the information. And that's all it is. Follow the information and then start to overlay your digital workflow on top of that. But always follow the information. Who wants my information? What information am I producing? And what are we going to do with it? These are just some thoughts on where to start. Don't spend anything on this till you really need to. By all means, talk to software vendors and anybody else who wants to sell you something, but work out your plan first, you know, and get some advice before you start spending thousands of pounds that you may not need to, because you can get free versions of some bits of software that may be sufficient for what you do. It depends on your need and what your organisation does. And just remember, you know, as I said, the changes are constant. There's a lot going on. we're going to see our industry transform over the next generation. Roles are going to change, organisations are going to change. BIM is one of the catalysts, but it's not the answer, it's not the silver bullet, it's not the only thing that's going on. And also, you know, we're going to see roles change, we're going to see outcomes be different, organisations will change and develop. And also, you know, going forward, we all need to keep an eye on these things. So I haven't even talked about smart cities and the Internet of Everything yet. That's another key piece of technology development in a wider context that's going to affect us all. And the convergence and crossover between technologies and industries and sectors is going to get more and more. And we're all going to become much more mobile and connected in the cloud and using mobile chips rather than desktop-based stuff as well. And that's probably about enough. That's where you can contact me. I'm happy to answer any questions or drop me a line. That's fine. Thank you very much.